What is the population of Africa? 1.4 billion people. Let that sink in. 1.4 billion human beings on one continent. That makes Africa the world's second most populous region, behind only Asia. More people than live in North America, South America, Europe, and Australia combined. And here's what you almost certainly didn't know, that 1.4 billion is going to become 2.5 billion by 2050. And by 2100, some projections put Africa's population at 4 billion, more than the entire current world population was in 1975. This is the most consequential demographic fact of the 21st century. More consequential than China's population. More consequential than India's. Because Africa's population is young, growing, and increasingly urban. And it is going to reshape global economics, global politics, global culture, and global climate in ways that almost no one in the Western world is preparing for. Today, we are going to tell the full story of Africa's population. The numbers, the people, the cities, the challenges, and the extraordinary future it is building. Welcome to GriotWave Academy. Before we continue, it is important to understand the mission behind GriotWave Academy. This platform was created to preserve knowledge, culture, music, and stories that often go unheard or are forgotten. GriotWave is not just about content. It is about building independent systems of learning, creativity, and empowerment. Through books, audio, technology, and media, the goal is to transform timeless wisdom into practical tools for today's generation and future generations. 1.46 billion people in 2024. Let's put that in context. 17% of all human beings alive today live in Africa, on a continent that covers 20% of the Earth's land surface. That is almost exactly proportional. But the direction of travel is what matters. In 1950, Africa had 230 million people, 9% of the global population. In 2024, it has 1.46 billion to 17%. By 2050, the UN median projection puts it at 2.5 billion, over 25% of the global population. Africa is not just growing, it is growing as a share of humanity. Nigeria, 220 million people in 2024. By 2050, the UN projects Nigeria will have 400 million people, making it the third most populous country on Earth, behind only India and China. A single African country with more people than the United States. Africa adds approximately 30 million people per year to its population, growing at 2.5% annually. The global average growth rate is 1.1%. Africa is growing more than twice as fast as the world average. These numbers are not a crisis. They are a civilizational reality that the world needs to understand, engage with, and, most importantly, that Africans themselves need to plan for. To understand where Africa's population is going, you need to understand where it has been. In 1950, Africa had 230 million people, roughly the population of the United States today. At that moment, Europe had over 500 million people. Asia was already at 1.4 billion. Africa was the least populous major region on Earth. By 1990, Africa had 630 million. It had nearly tripled in 40 years. This was already extraordinary growth, driven by declining death rates, vaccines, antibiotics, and basic healthcare reaching more communities, while birth rates remained high. In 2010, Africa crossed 1 billion people, a milestone that was barely noticed in global media. Today, 2024 1.46 billion, and we are still accelerating. The UN median projection for 2050 is 2.5 billion. The high-end projection for 2100 is nearly 4 billion people. This growth is not happening because African women are having more children than their grandmothers. In fact, the fertility rate has been falling. The growth is primarily driven by population momentum. There are so many young Africans alive today who have not yet had children that even at lower fertility rates, the absolute number of births keeps rising. By 2100, Africa could contain nearly 40% of the world's population. That is not a footnote. That is the central demographic fact of the next 80 years. Let's put Africa's population in global context, because the comparison is illuminating. China has 1.4 billion people, and its population is now declining. The one-child policy and modern economic development have pushed China's fertility rate below replacement level. China's population peaked in 2022 and is now falling. By 2100, some projections show China with 700 to 800 million people, roughly half its current size. India has 1.44 billion people, now the world's most populous country. But India's growth rate is also slowing. Its fertility rate is approaching replacement level. India's population will peak around 2050, and then stabilize or decline. Europe has 750 million people, and is shrinking, dependent on immigration to maintain its workforce. The EU has been running below replacement fertility for over 30 years. Africa? Opposite trajectory. 1.46 billion now. Growing fast. the only major world region whose population is growing significantly as a share of the global total. This has enormous implications. As China and Europe age and shrink, Africa grows and youngs. The world's center of economic gravity, consumption, labor supply, and innovation is going to move, not overnight, but unmistakably toward Africa. The question is not whether this shift will happen. It will. The question is whether it will be managed well, in terms of jobs, education, urban infrastructure, food, water, and energy. Let's talk about the country that, more than any other, embodies the scale and complexity of Africa's population story: Nigeria. 220 million people today, the most populous country in Africa. The sixth most populous country on Earth, larger than Russia, larger than Brazil, more people than France, Germany, and the UK combined. And it's growing fast. The UN projects Nigeria will reach 400 million people by 2050. 400 million. That is the current combined population of the United States and Canada. Lagos, Nigeria's commercial capital, is already one of the most extraordinary cities on Earth. 20 to 25 million people in the metropolitan area, growing by an estimated 600,000 people per year, through natural increase and rural-urban migration. Lagos has no fully functioning urban master plan. Its infrastructure, roads, water, drainage, electricity, was designed for a fraction of its current population. And yet Lagos works, chaotically, imperfectly, but vibrantly. Its entrepreneurial energy is extraordinary. The ethnic diversity of Nigeria's 220 million is staggering. Over 250 distinct ethnic groups, each with its own language, cultural tradition, and often its own political identity. Managing this diversity, distributing power, resources, and opportunity fairly across groups, is Nigeria's central governance challenge. And it has never been fully resolved. But Nigeria's 220 million are also 220 million creative, entrepreneurial, culturally vibrant human beings. Nollywood serves them. Afrobeats speaks for them. Fintech unicorns serve them. Nigeria's population is not a problem to be solved. It is a civilizational asset to be developed. Ethiopia is the second act in Africa's population story. 130 million people, the 12th most populous country on Earth, and one of the world's most ancient civilizations. For 3,000 continuous years, the Ethiopian highlands have been home to complex, literate, organized societies. The Kingdom of Aksum, the Zagwe dynasty, the Solomonic emperors. The only African country never colonized by a European power. Ethiopia's population has been there, building, farming, trading, fighting, creating, for longer than almost any other continuously inhabited region on Earth. Today, 130 million Ethiopians are navigating a critical transition. The fertility rate has fallen dramatically, from 7 children per woman in 1990 to about 4.1 today. Still high, but falling. This fertility transition, the process by which countries move from high to low birth rates, is happening in Ethiopia faster than it happened in many other developing countries. The education expansion has been remarkable. In 1990, only 20% of Ethiopian children were in school. Today, over 95%. This is one of the fastest educational expansions in African history. The challenge now is quality, moving from children being in classrooms to children actually learning to read and calculate. As education rises and fertility falls, Ethiopia approaches the demographic dividend moment, when the working-age population is large relative to dependence. If Ethiopia can create productive employment for its young population, as its manufacturing sector has been attempting, the demographic dividend could be transformative. Egypt, 108 million people, is the Arab world's largest country, North Africa's largest population, and the site of what is arguably the world's oldest continuous urban civilization. And Egypt has a geographic paradox. Unlike any other major country on Earth, 95% of its population lives in 5% of its territory. The Nile Valley and Delta is one of the most densely settled regions in the world. Outside this narrow green strip, the Sahara, uninhabitable, featureless, vast. Greater Cairo, 22 million people, is Africa's largest city and the Arab world's largest metropolitan area. It is growing by roughly 500,000 people per year. Cairo's infrastructure, its roads, its water system, its electricity grid, its sewage, was designed for a city a fraction of its current size. The pressure on Cairo is immense. Egypt's response to this pressure is extraordinary in its ambition. A brand new capital city, under construction in the Eastern Desert, designed for 6.5 million people by 2030, with a purpose-built government district, residential zones, and transport links. Whether the new administrative capital succeeds, whether it becomes a genuine city or an expensive monument, is one of the most important urban experiments in African history. Egypt adds 2 million people per year. It needs to create 700,000 new jobs per year just to keep youth unemployment stable. This race between population and economic capacity is the defining tension of Egyptian political economy and of African development broadly. The Democratic Republic of Congo, 105 million people, 200 plus languages, 2.34 million square kilometers of territory, and almost no paved roads connecting it. Kinshasa, the capital city on the Congo River, is already the world's largest officially French-speaking city. Paris has 2.1 million people in its municipality. Kinshasa has 17 million. The French-speaking world's demographic center of gravity is in Central Africa, and it is growing at 5% per year. The DRC has one of the world's highest fertility rates, 5.7 children per woman. The median age is 17 years, even younger than Nigeria's or Ethiopia's. 46% of the entire population is under 15. The dependency ratio, the share of the population that depends on working-age people for support, is one of the world's highest. By 2050, the DRC's population will be approximately 200 to 210 million. That will make it Africa's second or third most populous country, potentially surpassing Ethiopia. And yet, the DRC's GDP per capita is $600. 200 plus languages. Continuous conflict in the East. A territory larger than Western Europe without a functioning transnational road network. The DRC population story is Africa's most extreme case of the demographic challenge. A very young, very rapidly growing population in a country that currently lacks the infrastructure, institutions, and economic capacity to absorb and develop that population. The question, for the DRC and for Africa, is whether that can change fast enough. Here is the league table. Africa's 10 most populous countries today and their projected 2050 populations. Nigeria, 220 m now, 400 m by 2050, nearly doubling. Uganda may surprise you at number 10, only 48 million today, but projected to reach 106 million by 2050. Uganda has one of Africa's highest fertility rates and one of its youngest populations, a country of 48 million becoming 106 million in a single generation. This is not far future. Many Ugandans alive today will live to see that transformation. Tanzania, 65 m now, 130 m by 2050. Another doubling in one generation. South Africa is notable for its relative stability, projected to reach only 74 m by 2050, because its fertility rate has fallen to near replacement level, partly due to its more developed economy and better female education outcomes. The numbers on this slide represent not just population counts. They represent schools that need to be built, hospitals that need to be staffed, jobs that need to be created, cities that need to be designed, water systems that need to be maintained. Every person on this slide is a real human being, with needs, dreams, and contributions to make. The question is whether Africa's governments, institutions, and economies can grow fast enough to serve these people well. Median age 19. Let that number sit for a moment. In Japan, the median age is 48. In Germany, it's 44. In the United States, 38. In China, 38. Half of all Africans are younger than 19 years old. This is the most profound demographic fact about Africa. It is not just that Africa's population is large. It is that Africa's population is extraordinarily young, and that youth, if invested in correctly, is the raw material of an economic renaissance. The demographic dividend is a real phenomenon with well-documented history. South Korea in the 1960s through 80s, Taiwan, Singapore, China in the 80s and 90s. In each case, a large cohort of young workers, educated, relatively healthy, with fewer dependents than previous generations, drove an economic productivity surge that transformed their countries from poor to middle income in a generation. Africa is at the beginning of this transition. 840 million Africans are under 25 years old today. By 2030, Africa will have over 1 billion people under 25, the largest concentration of young people in the history of the world. These young Africans are already making their mark. Burna Boy, Wizkid, Davido. They are 30-something Nigerians who globalized African music. The Afrobeats generation was Africa's youth finding its voice and making the world listen. But the demographic dividend only pays off if the young population is educated, employed, and healthy. Without those three conditions, it becomes a demographic burden rather than a dividend. Africa is undergoing the fastest urbanization in human history, and almost no city government on the continent has the resources to keep up. In 1950, 15% of Africans lived in cities. Today, 45%. By 2050, it will be over 65%. That means more than 1 billion Africans living in cities in 2050, a number greater than all of Africa's population just 30 years ago. Lagos grows by 600,000 people per year. Kinshasa grows by 800,000. Dar es Salaam grows by 250,000. These are not growth rates. They are cities being born within cities, every year, every decade. The informal settlements that house 60 to 70% of urban Africans are extraordinary human achievements. Building a functioning community, water vendors, food markets, electricity from informal connections, waste collectors, schools, healthcare, without any government provision, is a testament to human ingenuity and community organization. But it is also a testament to government failure. The opportunity in African urbanization is real. Cities are more productive than rural areas. A farmer in rural Tanzania contributes $500 to GDP per year. An urban worker in Dar es Salaam contributes $2,500. Urbanization, if managed, is a development accelerant. The cities that get this right, that build transport systems, that upgrade informal settlements, that provide reliable electricity and water, will be the engines of African economic development in the 21st century. Kigali is doing it. Abidjan is attempting it. The others need to catch up. Africa has an average population density of 45 people per square kilometer, but that average hides extraordinary variation. The Nile Delta in Egypt, over 2,000 people per square kilometer, one of the most intensively farmed and densely settled landscapes on Earth, maintained for 7,000 consecutive years of agricultural civilization. The Sahara Desert, fewer than one person per square kilometer. Over 9 million square kilometers of land, bigger than China, with almost no one in it. Rwanda, 525 people per square kilometer, one of the world's highest rural population densities. Rwanda's land pressure is so extreme that the average farm size has fallen below 1 hectare per household. Land fragmentation and soil degradation are serious threats to food security. Namibia, 3 people per square kilometer, one of the most thinly populated countries in the world. Vast spaces, challenging climate, distant from major markets. Understanding Africa's demographic future requires understanding this geography. The population is not distributed evenly across a uniform landscape. It is concentrated in particular ecological zones, river valleys, highland plateaus, coastal regions. Where populations are growing fastest is often where ecological pressure is most severe. Africa's total fertility rate, the average number of children per woman, is 4.4. This is the world's highest regional fertility rate, and it explains most of Africa's population growth. But I want to challenge the framing that is often applied to this statistic. When Western media reports Africa's fertility rate of 4.4, there is often an implicit suggestion of irrationality, of people having children they cannot afford. This framing is wrong. High fertility in Africa is rational behavior given the context in which millions of African families live. When 1 in 12 children die before the age of 5 in the highest mortality countries, having more children is a survival strategy. When there is no pension system, and your children are your old age security, having more children is economically rational. When women have limited economic independence and social status is tied to motherhood, the incentive structures favor larger families. As these conditions change, as child mortality falls, as female education rises, as women gain economic agency, as urban living reduces the economic value of large families, fertility falls. This is the universal pattern of demographic transition. It happened in Europe. It happened in Asia. It is happening in Africa now. Niger's TFR of 6.9 versus South Africa's 2.3 captures the entire development spectrum. Niger has very low female education rates, very high child mortality, very low urbanization. South Africa has much higher female education, lower child mortality, high urbanization. The difference in fertility is almost entirely explained by these structural factors. The policy conclusion: educate girls. Everything follows. Here is the most important economic data point about Africa's population: 17% of the world's people, 3% of global GDP. Africa has 1 in 6 human beings and produces 3 cents of every $100 of global economic output. This is the gap. This is the challenge. Europe has 9% of the world's people and produces 22% of global GDP. The United States has 4% of the world's people and produces 25% of global GDP. These are the extremes of the economic distribution. Countries that converted their population into economic output at extraordinarily high multipliers. Africa's economic underperformance is not primarily about intelligence or ambition or culture. It is about infrastructure gaps, institutional weaknesses, extractive trade relationships, and the accumulated disadvantages of colonialism. These are structural, not personal. But here is the pivot. That 17% vs 3% gap is also the description of an opportunity. 1.46 billion people generating only 3% of global GDP means the potential for productivity gains is enormous. If Africa's GDP per capita reaches the current global average of $12,500, which is not an unrealistic long-term aspiration, Africa's total economic output would be $18 trillion, making it the world's largest single economy. The journey from here to there is the development story of the 21st century. It requires education, infrastructure, institutional development, and time. But the direction is set. One of the most underreported stories in global development is the health revolution that is happening in Africa. And it is directly connected to population growth. In 1960, average life expectancy in Africa was 40 years. Not 40 years in some places, 40 years across the continent. People were dying of diseases that were entirely preventable and curable: malaria, tuberculosis, diarrheal diseases, complications of childbirth. By 2024, average life expectancy is 63 years, a 23-year gain. People are living to see their grandchildren. They are spending more years as productive workers. They are contributing to economic and social life for longer. This is a genuine triumph of public health, international cooperation, and African healthcare workers. The under-5 mortality decline is perhaps even more striking, from 240 deaths per 1,000 births in 1990 to 70 per 1,000 in 2024, a 70% reduction. For every 10 children who died before their 5th birthday in 1990, only 3 are dying today. This is not a small achievement. This is one of the greatest mass rescues of human lives in history. But Africa's health challenges remain severe. 95% of global malaria is in Africa. 66% of global HIV is in sub-Saharan Africa. Maternal mortality, women dying in childbirth, is 400 times higher in some African countries than in Europe. The health gap is real. And health connects directly to population. Longer life plus falling child mortality equals more people alive equals population growth. The health revolution is the demographic revolution. When we ask, what is the population of Africa, we should also ask, where do Africans live? The answer is, everywhere. The transatlantic slave trade, the largest forced migration in human history, removed 12 to 15 million Africans from the continent over 400 years. Their descendants now number over 200 million people in the Americas. Brazil has 120 million Afro-Brazilians, the second largest African-descended population outside Africa. The United States has 45 million Black Americans. The Caribbean, Colombia, Venezuela, Cuba, African heritage runs deep through the entire Atlantic world. And the contemporary diaspora, people who have chosen to migrate, sends Africa more money than any other source of external finance. $100 billion per year in remittances. More than foreign direct investment. More than official development aid. And unlike aid, remittances come without conditions, without consultants, and without administrative overhead. Senegal's remittance to GDP ratio is 10% plus. For Lesotho, it is over 20%. For individual families, a remittance from a child working in France or London means school fees paid, medicine purchased, a concrete floor installed. It is the most direct form of development finance in existence. But brain drain is the shadow side of this story. For every doctor Nigeria loses to the UK, Nigeria's healthcare system is that much weaker. The ethical question, should wealthy countries recruit from the poor countries that trained the professionals, remains unanswered in global policy. If there is one investment that will determine whether Africa's population growth is a gift or a burden, it is education. And the news here is genuinely good, with important caveats. In 1990, only 52% of sub-Saharan African children were in primary school. Today, over 95%. In 30 years, Africa achieved the fastest school enrollment expansion in human history. 350 million children are in African schools today. That is more than the entire population of the United States. But the World Bank's learning poverty statistic stops me in my tracks every time I read it. 90% of 10-year-olds in sub-Saharan Africa cannot read a simple text with comprehension. They are in school. They are not learning at the level they need to for the modern economy. This is the distinction between enrollment and education. Getting children through the school gates is the first step. The harder step is ensuring that when they leave school, they can read, calculate, reason, and contribute productively to a modern economy. The positive story. Girls' education has transformed. In Rwanda and Botswana, girls outperform boys at every level. In South Africa, girls are more likely than boys to complete secondary school. The gender gap in African education is closing faster than anywhere else in the developing world. And technology is democratizing access. Khan Academy content in Swahili. Ethiopian secondary school curriculum on mobile apps. Remote learning platforms reaching rural students who have no reliable school within walking distance. The education revolution has mobile phones as its infrastructure. Feeding 1.46 billion people is an achievement in itself. Feeding 2.5 billion by 2050 is the challenge we need to plan for now. Africa has the agricultural land to do it. 65% of the world's uncultivated arable land is in Africa. The Congo Basin alone has enough uncultivated fertile land to feed Africa twice over. The question is not land. It is investment and infrastructure. Only 6% of African farmland is irrigated. In Asia, the figure is 37%. Irrigation means farming can continue through dry seasons. It means one harvest becomes 2 or 3. It means the variability of rainfall, increasingly severe with climate change, doesn't destroy the entire crop. Africa's food security challenge is substantially an irrigation challenge. The smallholder farmer is Africa's food system. 60 million households, farming less than 2 hectares each, producing 80% of Africa's food. These farmers are the most important people in Africa for the continent's developmental future, and they receive some of the least investment, the least attention, and the least political representation. Improving smallholder productivity by 50% through better seeds, better access to fertilizer, better market connectivity would do more for African food security than any large-scale agricultural project. The technology exists. The political will is what's needed. And 280 million chronically food insecure Africans. This is not primarily an agricultural failure. It is a conflict, climate, and market failure story. Most food insecurity is concentrated in war zones or drought-affected areas, where food exists nearby, but cannot be transported to where people are. Before we continue, if you are a builders, creators, entrepreneurs, purpose-driven individuals, the GriotWave Inner Circle is now open. If you want to explore this topic further, scan the QR code for additional resources, courses, recommended readings, maps, and extended discussions. There is far more to Africa than what can fit into a single episode, and this is only the beginning of a much deeper journey into the continent's history, cultures, people, and future. And if you'd like a deeper dive into any topic related to Africa or Pan-Africanism, leave a comment below and we'll cover it in a future video. The most powerful lever for Africa's demographic and economic future is one that costs less per unit of impact than any other development intervention: educating girls. Every year of secondary school a girl completes reduces her lifetime fertility by approximately 0.3 children. It increases her lifetime income by 10 to 15%. It improves her children's health outcomes. It delays marriage. It increases civic participation. Nigeria's fertility rate of 5.0 and Rwanda's of 3.8. These are not cultural inevitabilities. They reflect differences in female education rates, female economic participation, and access to healthcare. Rwanda has invested deliberately in women's agency, constitutionally mandating that women hold at least 30% of parliamentary seats. In practice, 61%. The result is governance that actually reflects the priorities of over half the population. The economic argument is equally powerful. African women are already doing enormous economic work: subsistence farming, market trading, household management, informal sector enterprise. But they are doing it with less access to credit, less land security, less access to inputs, and less political representation than men. Remove those barriers, and the productivity gain is transformative. Child marriage is the most direct impediment to realizing Africa's female potential. 40% of girls in sub-Saharan Africa married before 18. Their education ends, their economic independence is curtailed, their children start at a disadvantage. Ending child marriage is not just a rights issue. It is the demographic policy, with the largest single impact on Africa's future. Climate change is not an abstract future risk for Africa's 1.4 billion people. It is a present reality, and it is the greatest single threat to Africa's demographic stability in the 21st century. Africa contributes 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions. The United States contributes 15%. China 28%. Europe 17%. Africa is the smallest emitter of any inhabited continent, and it is bearing consequences disproportionate to any other region. The World Bank's projection of 216 million climate migrants by 2050 is staggering. These are not refugees crossing international borders. These are people who can no longer live where they were born because the land has dried up, the floods come annually, or the sea has taken the coast. 86 million of these internal climate migrants will be in sub-Saharan Africa. Lagos sits partly below sea level. Dakar's low-lying neighborhoods flood with increasing frequency. Alexandria, Egypt's second city, is one of the world's most climate-vulnerable coastal cities. The megacities where Africa's population is concentrating are, in many cases, precisely the areas most threatened by sea level rise and extreme weather. And the agricultural impact. The people most dependent on predictable rainfall are Africa's 600 million smallholder farmers. When rainfall becomes unpredictable, when droughts become more frequent, when floods destroy harvests, the food insecurity that results affects the most vulnerable populations most severely. Climate justice. The demand that wealthy emitters compensate Africa for the damage they have caused is both a moral imperative and an economic necessity. West Africa, 450 million people, is the most culturally dynamic and most demographically consequential region in Africa. Nigeria alone anchors it. 220 million people, more than all of West Africa's other 15 countries combined. When Nigeria catches a cold, West Africa gets pneumonia. But the full tapestry of West Africa's population is extraordinary. House of Speakers, 75 million, spanning northern Nigeria, Niger, and the Sahel. Yoruba, 45 million, in Nigeria, Benin, and Togo, and across the Americas in the diaspora. Fulani, 25 million, dispersed across the Sahel from Senegal to Sudan, one of Africa's great pastoral civilizations. Akan/Twi, 20 million in Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire. This is not fragmentation. This is the richness of a civilizational zone that has been trading, intermarrying, and exchanging ideas across the Sahel and coastal belt for millennia. The Sahel crisis is West Africa's darkest shadow. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, the three countries that have experienced coups since 2020, also have some of the world's highest fertility rates and lowest development indicators. Population is growing fastest in the places where institutions are weakest. This is the most urgent demographic development mismatch on Earth. And yet, Afrobeats is the world's most listened to regional music genre outside of US pop. Nollywood produces 2,500 films per year. Ankara fashion is worn in Tokyo, London, and Sao Paulo. West Africa's 450 million people are putting their culture into the world at a pace that the Harlem Renaissance only hinted at. East Africa's 350 million people represent the continent's most dynamic growth zone, combining rapid population growth with significant economic development. Ethiopia and Tanzania anchor the region with massive, rapidly growing populations. Both will double by 2050. Kenya anchors it economically, the regional hub, the financial center, the technology pioneer. Uganda is the demographic stress test, 48 million today, projected to be 106 million in 2050. Uganda's total fertility rate of 4.7 reflects a very young, rural, and still rapidly growing population. Uganda will need to create an extraordinary number of jobs and massively expand its educational and healthcare systems in a single generation. Whether it can is one of the most consequential development questions in Africa. Rwanda's situation is unique. 14 million people in a country the size of Massachusetts. 525 people per square kilometer of rural land. Rwanda has essentially no room to grow agriculturally. Every available hill is already farmed. Its development model, therefore, must focus on high-value services, tourism, technology, financial services, and regional economic integration through AfCFTA rather than traditional agricultural expansion. Somalia's story is one of extraordinary resilience. Through 30 years of civil war, state collapse, famine, and mass displacement, Somalia's population has continued to grow. Mogadishu, which was a war zone within living memory, is now a city of 2.5 million with construction cranes on the skyline. The human will to build cannot be eliminated. Southern Africa presents a distinct demographic profile from the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, driven primarily by South Africa's characteristics as the region's dominant economy. South Africa's fertility rate of 2.3 is near the European average. Its population is not in the same demographic moment as Nigeria or Ethiopia. It is approaching stabilization. This is because South Africa has more developed economic and institutional conditions, 70% urbanization, higher female education rates, better healthcare access. But South Africa's demographic story is one of the most complex on Earth, because it contains within one country the demographics of a developed nation, white South Africans, income, health, education statistics comparable to Western Europe, and the demographics of a sub-Saharan African country, black South Africans, income, health, education statistics comparable to regional neighbors. This is the material legacy of apartheid, 50 years of deliberate demographic engineering that created two populations in one state. South Africa's 33% unemployment, 60% for youth, is not random. It is the direct consequence of denying a majority of the population education, economic participation, and land for 50 years. The demographic time bomb of apartheid is exploding in slow motion through South Africa's social statistics. Zimbabwe's population story is also extraordinary. 16 million people who survived hyperinflation, at its peak, $100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars for one egg, political repression, and mass displacement, and are now rebuilding. The Zimbabwean diaspora of 3-4 million, largely in South Africa, represents one of the continent's largest proportional emigrations. 1.4 billion people with 80% mobile penetration. Africa is the most mobile-first major region in the world, and that fact is reshaping what is possible in terms of reaching, serving, and empowering this enormous population. The mobile phone leapfrogged the infrastructure constraint. Africa never had widespread landlines. Africa could not afford to build the bank branch networks that Europe and North America developed over 200 years. But it could get mobile phones to its people, and mobile phones contain multitudes. 650 million mobile money accounts. This is not a curiosity. This is the largest unbanked to banked transition in human history. People who have never had a formal bank account, who kept cash under the mattress or in savings groups, now have a digital financial identity. They can save, send money, receive payment, take credit, buy insurance, all through a phone that cost $40. And the innovation continues. Zipline's drone delivery in Rwanda is operational medicine, not science fiction. Blood delivered to a remote hospital in 30 minutes by drone, when the road would take 4 hours. The company has now expanded to Nigeria, Ghana, and beyond. African AY is a particularly important development. When ChatGPT was trained, it was trained primarily on English language data. Masakane, a Pan-African research collective, is building natural language processing models for 300 plus African languages. This is not just technically important, it is culturally and politically essential. In Africa, whose AI systems are built in African languages, trained on African cultural data, and designed for African problems, will be far more technologically self-sufficient than one that adopts Western AI wholesale. Let me describe the world in 2100, a world that children being born in Africa today will live to see. 3.9 billion Africans, the UN median projection. 39% of all humanity. More people on this continent than the entire world had in 1975. China, 800 million, declining. Japan, 55 million, declining. Germany, 65 million, declining. The demographic future of the world is not European. It is not East Asian. It is African. What does 4 billion Africans mean for the world? It means Africa has the world's largest consumer market, by far. It means Africa produces the world's largest workforce, by far. It means Africa's cities are the world's largest cities. Kinshasa, Lagos, Dar es Salaam, each potentially 50 plus million people. The world's biggest urban centers will be in Africa, in the 22nd century. It means Africa's votes in the UN General Assembly, where every country has one vote, represent 39% of the vote. That is geopolitical power. It means Africa's cultural production, music, film, literature, fashion, food, reaches a market of 4 billion consumers who create and shape culture for the rest of the world to adopt. But the jobs challenge is daunting. Creating productive employment for 4 billion people over 80 years requires more ambition, more investment, and more institutional capacity than any civilization has ever attempted. The alternative, 4 billion Africans without productive employment, is a humanitarian, geopolitical, and environmental catastrophe. The future is determined by choices being made right now. About education, about infrastructure, about governance, about climate. The 4 billion people of 2100 will thank or condemn the decisions made in 2024. 5 myths, 5 truths. Let's be direct. Myth 1. Africa is overpopulated. Europe has 72 people per square kilometer. South Asia has 300 plus. Africa has 46. Africa is the least densely populated major inhabited region on Earth. The overpopulation framing is not a demographic fact. It is a political and often racially coded anxiety. Myth 2. Africa's population growth will cause a global crisis. Every wealthy region in the world went through exactly the same demographic transition Africa is going through. England's population tripled between 1800 and 1900. Germany's doubled in a generation. No one called European population growth a quote global crisis. The crisis framing applied to African population growth is a double standard. Myth 3. More people means more poverty. This is empirically false. China had over 1 billion people and lifted 800 million out of extreme poverty in 40 years. Singapore has 7,000 people per square kilometer and is wealthy. Population density and poverty are not correlated. Myth 4. Africa has nothing to offer a large population. We spent the previous 2 videos on this. 65% of uncultivated arable land. 40% of the world's gold. The world's largest solar potential. The strategic minerals the green energy transition requires. Africa has more to offer its people than almost any region on Earth. Myth 5. African women need to have fewer children. They are already choosing to. The fertility rate has fallen by 30% in 2 generations. The rate of change will accelerate as female education and healthcare expand. The choice is being made. The structures need to change faster. 4 things the world, governments, corporations, and individuals in wealthy countries must understand about Africa's 1.4 billion people. First, Africa is not a charity case. The sustained narrative of Africa as a place of suffering requiring external rescue is both factually wrong and destructive. 1.4 billion people, the world's youngest population, sitting atop the world's greatest mineral and agricultural endowment, generating culture that is listened to in every corner of the world. This is not a region that needs to be saved. It needs to be treated as a partner and dealt with fairly. Second, migration is already happening and will increase. If wealthy countries want to manage migration from Africa, the most cost-effective approach is investing in African development. Every dollar invested in African education and infrastructure reduces the future migration pressure by orders of magnitude, more than any border enforcement technology. This is not idealism, it is arithmetic. Third, African institutions must lead. The most important investments Africa needs are not physical infrastructure, they are institutional, capable civil services, independent courts, transparent budgeting, effective local government. Without institutions, physical infrastructure becomes extractable wealth for corrupt networks. With institutions, every investment multiplies. Fourth, climate finance is not optional. The world cannot expect the continent least responsible for climate change to bear the costs of protecting the global climate. the Congo forests, the Sahel vegetation, the coastal mangroves, without fair financial compensation. This is not a negotiating position, it is a physical reality. Your reference table. A few things to highlight. Niger, TFR 6.9, median age 15. The most extreme demographic profile in Africa. Every 1,000 Nigerians alive today will be 2,700 in 2050, if current trends continue. Niger is the fastest growing country in the world by fertility, and one of the least developed. South Africa, TFR 2.3, median age 27. The demographic outlier of sub-Saharan Africa, near replacement fertility, approaching population stabilization. A result of its more developed economy and higher female education levels. Uganda, TFR 4.7, median age 16. 48 million today, 106 million by 2050, more than doubling in a generation. Uganda's development challenge is perhaps Africa's most acute demographic pressure story. Egypt, TFR 2.7, median age 26. North Africa's demographic transition is more advanced. Egypt is closer to stabilization than most of sub-Saharan Africa. DRC, TFR 5.7, median age 17. 105 million today, 210 million by 2050. The country with the world's greatest unrealized economic potential is also one of its fastest growing demographically. 8 things you now understand about Africa's population that most people, including most policymakers, do not. 1. The scale. 1.46 billion today. 2.5 billion by 2050. 4 billion by 2100. This is the most important demographic fact of the 21st century. 2. The concentration. Growth is heaviest in the least developed countries, Nigeria, DRC, Uganda, Niger. This means the developmental challenge is most acute, precisely where institutional capacity is weakest. 3. The youth. 840 million under 25. The world's largest concentration of young people. Dividend or disaster, depending entirely on whether they are educated, healthy, and employed. 4. The cities. Urbanizing faster than anywhere in history. African megacities are being built at a pace and scale that no urban planning tradition has ever confronted. 5. The fertility transition. It is happening. Female education is driving it. It will take another generation to complete. The policy is simple. Educate girls. 6. The diaspora. 170 million plus people. $100 billion plus in remittances. The most economically productive, culturally connected, and globally influential African population outside the continent. 7. Climate. 4% of emissions, 40% of impacts, 216 million potential climate migrants. The injustice is mathematical. 8. The real challenge. Population is not Africa's problem. Underdevelopment is. The resources exist. The people are extraordinary. The institutions and investments are what's needed. 1.4 billion faces. 1.4 billion stories. 1.4 billion futures. Not a statistic, not a crisis, not a problem to be managed from the outside by people who have decided that Africa's population is something to be worried about rather than something to be celebrated. A civilization in motion. The child being born in Lagos today will be 26 years old in 2050, a year when Africa will have 2.5 billion people. She will grow up with a mobile phone before she has running water. She will learn on a tablet before she sits in a formally built school. She will send money to her family with her thumb. She will listen to music made 5,000 kilometers away by someone who looks and sounds like her. She will vote. She will build. She will create. The person born in Kinshasa tonight will inherit a country with $24 trillion in mineral wealth and a constitution that has never fully served him. He will fight for his country's dignity. He will probably win. The girl born in the Ethiopian highlands will go to school. Her mother, perhaps, did not. Her daughter will go to university. This is demographic transition. This is what 1.4 billion people look like when they are building, not just surviving. Subscribe to GriotWave Academy. Share this video. Tag someone who still sees Africa's people as a problem, and show them what a civilization of 1.4 billion actually looks like. Asante. Merci. Thank you. Before you go, help this message reach more people. If you learned something new today, like the video, subscribe for more deep dives, and share this with someone who still thinks Africa is a country. Small conversations can challenge big misconceptions, and every share helps expand understanding. If you want to explore this topic further, scan the QR code for additional resources, courses, recommended readings, maps, and extended discussions. There is far more to Africa than what can fit into a single episode, and this is only the beginning of a much deeper journey into the continent's history, cultures, people, and future. And if you'd like a deeper dive into any topic related to Africa or Pan-Africanism, leave a comment below and we'll cover it in a future video.